Hello, everyone. Welcome to Spirituality in Action with myself, Nanette Kennedy, and Dee Meyer of Humanities Team. And we are very excited to be taking on these interviews with people that have great messages to share with others and to help us with our everyday life decisions and ways we can live in oneness. And today we have Donna Corso, who happens to also be Neil Donald Walsh's personal assistant since 2001. And Neil's our founder, so there's a nice connection there for the Humanities Team, people that are listening in. Donna is an Amazon.com bestseller author right now of her new book, When the Wind Chimes Chime, Ending the Greatest Fear of All. And Donna is committed to opening a dialogue about death and dying, and she encourages people to explore the beliefs and fears that shape their end-of-life experiences and to come to terms with the fears so they can embrace death as a part of the natural life cycle. While being an advocate for reclaiming our human rights and dignity, Donna is also an advocate for our beloved planet Earth. Her passion for the environment was ignited in 1988 when she attended her first WindStar Symposium in Aspen, Colorado. WindStar was a grassroots environmental education organization co-founded by singer John Denver in 1976. Following her attendance at that symposium, she returned home and became involved in environmental efforts through which she was honored with an Environmental Improvement Award in 1994 in Lake County, Ohio. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Donna to Spirituality in Action.
Well, thank you, Nanette. I'm happy to be here with Spirituality in Action.
You are welcome, and I'm very, very excited to talk to you about this book. I can't really remember right off the top of my head when I first read it, but I do remember writing back to you saying it was a page-turner and I could not put it down. And I feel that very strongly from the heart. And one of the beautiful things about the book is that you so wonderfully, gracefully, and delicately take people on this journey that's kind of a tough journey. But the beauty is that you bring us back, and you bring us all back with hope. And it's a book that will always just sit with me. So I just like to say that on my, personal note, that I really enjoyed it, and I think it's a very big gift. And I can't agree more with you that the conversation about death and dying and fears and those kinds of things really do need to be spoken about a lot more than they are. Things have gotten better, but it could even still be better. What's your idea about speaking more and being more open with that fear of death? How do we get that conversation started?
Well, that's my hope with this book. My hope was, the first part of the book, as you remember, is the story of a little boy who died. And my intention for that was to open hearts, but also to open eyes, and to open our minds, and just really understanding that death is not the end of anything, that death is simply life changing into another expression, that we continue to go on. At least that's my personal belief system. And, we've shared before, Nanette, I think that's your belief system as well. And so, if we think of it in those terms, we're always going to feel sadness when someone dies, because we're here in physical bodies and we feel a connection with other people because of our physicality. And it's important to be able to grieve and to mourn for those we've lost in physical life. But I think we really have to give more and more thought and understanding to the idea that there is really no end to life, that those people have not actually, they don't cease to exist. They simply are in a different place, experiencing in a different way. We can still talk to them even when they're on the other side, and, just really understanding the bigger picture. We're just these little people walking around in little vehicles called bodies. That's really what we need the body for, and what we call death is simply leaving the bodies behind and moving on to something greater. So if we can just embrace that whole idea that there is something even more magnificent than this life that's waiting for us and for those people that we've lost, and they're experiencing it right now. I know when my mom and dad each died, of course they were both 90 when they died, but I really wasn't that sad. Certainly I would miss them, but I thought, wow, how exciting that they get to go on and leave those 90-year-old bodies behind that weren't working so well anyway. So I think really just keeping in mind, that it goes on. There's no such thing as death for real.
Well, and you're very blessed to have had your parents for that long, and even though my parents both died at younger ages, I can relate to that because both my parents happen to have been suffering towards the ends of their lives. And which kind of leads into, you've told this incredible story about the trauma that this particular family goes through to try to protect the child's dignity and the integrity at the end of his life. And I know that you've been asked this many times, but what, from your heart, what makes this story more than just a sad tale?
Well, as I said, I wanted to open hearts, but I wanted to open our minds because there's more to his story than just the fact that he got cancer and died. It was the way that he had to spend his last few months of his life. That's a time when it's so important that we be able to prepare for our crossing over if we know that it's coming. Of course, it happens more quickly for some people. But for him, it was a time for him to do the thing that children like to do and to be with his family and to just have good closure. He didn't experience that, and the reason is because our medical community insisted that they were going to amputate his arms and part of his lungs and part of his ribs and give him chemo and give him radiation. Even though the cancer had already metastasized, it was very clear that he was going to be dying. And as you know from the story, his parents, his father in particular, had done so much research and found about 300 other children who had similar situations, and they all went along with the doctor's orders, and every single one of them, 100% of them, died anyway. And he died a horrible death. So the parents simply wanted to protect their child's dignity and to be able to give him a peaceful last few weeks or months of his life. And they weren't able to do that. They did manage to avoid all of those invasive therapies, which, readers will read his story in the book about how they did that. But they had to be kind of on the run from the law, because the law is, if your child is under 16, you have to go along with whatever the doctor says. And if the doctor says they're going to amputate, then that's what they're going to do. The thing is, the parents both said to the doctor, isn't there some alternative? And as soon as they used that word alternative, the dreaded A word, as I call it, the doctor said, if you try anything like that, we will take your son, make him ward of the state, and we will do those operations with or without your consent. And so that meant that in order for him to have a peaceful transition, they had to keep running from the law, which they did for the last few months. But that made a very unpleasant time leading up to his final crossing over.
It's kind of hard to believe that we're still living in a society where a doctor can say something like, if you don't, this is what's going to happen.
I know.
And you don't have anything to say about it. Right now, can you give us the link to where people can purchase your book?
Sure, they can go on my website and buy it through Amazon or Barnes & Noble from my website, which is simply DonnaCorso.com. Corso is C-O-R-S-O, DonnaCorso.com. And if they purchase it there, if they go to the top of the website, it'll say buy this book. Click there, and it'll take you to a little YouTube where you can see just a 1-minute YouTube of the little boy. His name was Andreas, and if you go to the bottom of that page, you can click on Amazon and purchase it right there, and you'll get lots of freebies if you do it in August.
Oh, cool. And I'm going to have you explain those a little bit in detail here in a minute, but I want to get back to asking you some more questions. I love the title of your book. I'm a writer too, and titles sometimes are difficult to come up with. What inspired you to use this title?
Well, the little boy, 7-year-old Andreas, is the one that gave me that title. See, I never met Andreas in real life, but I've just talked to his parents. But the very last words that he uttered as he was leaving this planet happened to be "when the wind chimes chime." His father happened to be very close to him, leaning near him. Andreas was in a hospital by that time and had just taken off his own oxygen mask. And his father, whose name is Gordy, when Gordy rushed over to put the oxygen mask back over Andreas's mouth, Andreas took his daddy's arm and pushed it away and said, "Turn off my lungs," and looked right into his daddy's eyes and said it again, "Turn off my lungs." And he lived just a few more moments after that and was very peaceful by that time. And as he was leaving, he said those words. I asked Gordy if he had any idea what Andreas might have meant by that, "when the wind chimes chime." And Gordy seemed to think that he was telling him that when you hear wind chimes, know that I am near you, something like that. And that might be a part of it, but my personal opinion is I always remembered another author named Donna Brinkley, who had several near-death experiences and was actually clinically dead on the other side for 28 minutes before he came back into his body. And I remembered in his books, the first one he wrote was Saved by the Light. Many people might be familiar with that. I always remembered that he heard wind chimes when he was crossing over to the other side. So I had a conversation with Danian, and he said that when we are leaving this planet, when we're entering that tunnel, the tunnel that everyone hears about in a near-death experience, our frequency is acclimating to the frequency on the other side, and that people hear something. For some people, it might sound like angelic, celestial music. For him, it always came across as wind chimes. So he feels that was Andreas was actually entering that tunnel at the time when he said that.
Wow.
And I thought it was a pretty cool title he was giving us, too, so I used it.
Oh, it's knowing that, because I did not know that.
Oh, you didn't? Okay.
No, I did not know that, and if it was in the book, I read right past it, but boy, that is beautiful.
I think you read the manuscript, so maybe that part wasn't in there at that time. But
yeah, I did read the manuscript,
yeah.
So that's maybe why I didn't see it, but boy, oh boy,
that
really, that's very powerful, and it's very beautiful, and I think the story you just told about, when he was parting from his father is that we can learn so much from our children, too.
Absolutely. There are teachers. In fact, one of the part of his story was when they took him out of the country to evade the doctor's orders. They took him to China. Gordy took him to China. And some Qigong masters from a 6,000-year lineage of Qigong masters gathered around Andreas to see if they could help him. And they had a Chinese medical doctor there as well. And they all talked in Chinese, and then suddenly they bowed to him and left. And when Gordy went over to the interpreter to ask if they, what did they say? Can they help my little boy? And the interpreter said, they have identified your son as one of the ancient ones, and this is the way his soul is to leave this planet. This is his soul's journey, and neither your Western medical treatment that would cut him all apart, amputate and do all that, nor our Eastern Qigong, nothing can make this soul stay. This is his path. And they also told Gordy, you need to listen to him because he is the teacher and you are the student. And I thought that was like one of the most beautiful parts of his last few months on the planet, was to have that affirmed, that he was an ancient soul. And we can't really judge that just because he was here for only 7 years. A lot of people would say, oh, he died too young, he shouldn't have died that young. We can't really judge how long another person or any person is to stay on this planet, because I believe that was part of his legacy, was to point out to us through this book that about the fear and the imbalance that we have with our medical institutions,
That actually kind of leads into a couple of things I wanted to ask you. One of which is there was an illusion that the cancer could have been caused by fluoride in the water system. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. First of all, let me just say I'm no expert. All I've done is go online and do a lot of research, and I know that Gordy had done so much research during those times as well. Excuse me. And I look at it as being two sides to every issue. And for this issue of having fluoride entered into our water system. One side of it is there's a chemical industry. They have a product they have to sell. It's a waste product. And they have to somehow let us think it's good for us. And then, of course, the government agency, which is funded a lot by the chemical industry, they have to let us believe that it's not only is it good for us, but that they are monitoring it. The other side of that is we have whistleblowers. We have people who actually risk their reputations, in some cases risk their lives, to call to our attention that maybe it's not such a good thing. Maybe fluoride is not really in our highest interest, and actually the fluoride that's being put in our water contains lead. It contains arsenic, mercury, cadmium, thallium, a whole bunch of things that we should not be ingesting. And yet our choices have been taken away from us. It's been put in the water system in so many places. Not here where I live. We so far have resisted it, and there are other countries don't allow it, by the way. It's only in our country. And many communities are starting to ban it. But in the community that Andreas lived in those times, and I don't say in the book where he came from because I really don't want to go there, but where he lived, I know that it was very highly fluoridated. And even the Cancer Institutes made a statement, and there's a statement in my book that there is a possible connection between fluoridated water and especially bone cancer, and especially in boys, and especially in 7-year-olds. Now, what does that say? He was a 7-year-old boy, and he had osteosarcoma. So, I can't say that this is proof, but do the research, and people will understand. And there's a wonderful website called fluoridealert.org. Fluoride, F-L-U-O-R-I-D-E, alert.org, and they give all kinds of information there. So it's important that if we live in a place where the water is highly fluoridated, and children especially, because their bones are growing and the fluoride goes directly into the bones, and they drink pound for pound, they drink much more water than adults do. So it's like giving an adult dosage of medicine to a child, which we would never do.
Right. That's pretty powerful stuff. And, of course, the next question is, can we change those laws, and do we have any power? How can we make a difference where we do live?
Well, as far as the laws about fluoride, I think if enough people wake up and tell their communities, wherever their water system comes from, start a movement and say we want fluoride taken out of the water. I think Portland, Oregon might have just passed something where they're no longer going to fluoridate. Don't quote me because I could be wrong about that, but I think I read that somewhere. I live in southern Oregon, and we don't have fluoridated water here. So I think, it just takes enough people to wake up and understand the whole issue and say no more. As far as an issue about, making a difference in the laws about children, my understanding is it's a state-by-state law about children who are under 16 not having the choices of including natural cures, things like that, or methods, treatments. And I don't know that we can change those laws. As adults, we have choices. We can say no to the chemo and radiation, and we can include whatever palliative treatments or natural treatments we wish, but children don't seem to have that. But I think we have to try. We have to do whatever we can to make those changes. And I suppose it might start with just education and calling everyone's attention to what's really going on, maybe even writing letters to the editor, just really getting the word out there that we need to have take our choices back, take our own humanity back. It's so many things have been taken from us in recent years in particular, but it's all based on fear, I think.
And I think I hadn't thought about this. I probably thought about it when I read the manuscript the first time, but I guess I'm very lucky that when I told the doctors for my son, who was 9, that we were not going to do chemotherapy, that I was very lucky that I didn't have to go through the turmoil that this family had to go through. But I also want to ask you, when you sat down with the pen and paper, what made you want to write a story about death and dying? How did that happen?
Well, I've known for many years that I was going to have something to do with helping people to die without fear. And that goes back about 40 years or so. When I was, I used to read all metaphysical books, or have most of my life since a teenager, and I think I was in my 20s or 30s when my favorite best-selling author at that time was Ruth Montgomery.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. And she was a very credible person in Washington, D.C. as a journalist, as a correspondent. She was in the White House a lot, so she was known as a credible person. And then she started writing metaphysical books and really doing automatic writing and connecting with spirit on the other side. And all of her books ended with things that were going to be occurring during these times that we're living in right now. I remember writing her a letter one time telling her how much I enjoyed her books and telling her that I wasn't afraid of the coming times. Of course, that was a long time ago. It was way in the future. It was easy to not be afraid. But
right.
I told her how much I wanted to be here during these times, and she wrote back to me. I opened my mailbox one day, and there's this little envelope with a half sheet of tablet paper and handwriting on it, and it was from her. And she said, "Indeed, I think you will be one of the people who will be there during those days, and you will be helping people to die without fear." And I've always held that phrase in my heart. It's what led me to volunteer a little bit for hospice when I lived first of all in Ohio, and then later when I moved to Colorado, I volunteered again for hospice, just to get me used to being around people who were getting near the end of their lives. And I just always knew I was going to write something. And as soon as I heard Gordy, the father, I heard him stand up in a meeting one time and tell briefly about his son who had died. And I just knew, I think that's a story that really needs to be told, and I think that's what I'm supposed to do, is to tell that story. So that ended up.
And, with the hospice and that, experience,
Mm-hmm.
Can you go into the death with dignity and how it works?
Mm-hmm.
And is it legal? And if so, where?
Mm-hmm.
And the circumstances?
Yeah, there's a wonderful organization. In fact, it's based right in near you. It's in Denver. It's called Compassion and Choices, and anyone can Google compassionandchoices.org. It is a nonprofit organization that really helps the different states to put through laws that will protect doctors if the doctors are willing to help a patient who requests it. And there are many parameters. I mean, it's not just for everyone. You have to be an adult. You have to express a desire for this. That, in other words, if an adult says, if I get to a point in my life where I have an unmanageable disease and I know that I'm going to die soon and it's very painful, and if I want to die peacefully, I want my doctor to be able to prescribe something that will just help me to go to sleep so that I can leave my body. This is something that is very controversial, and yet it's not. People are seeing this as our God-given right to have a choice like that. It's not like suicide. This is only for people who have a six-month or less prognosis, and it has to be verified by more than one doctor who says this person does not have more than 6 months to live. And if they, in most cases, hospice care can offer enough palliative treatment that there's not going to be a lot of pain and people can cross over fine. But there are certain cases where even the palliative measures are not going to help them, and it's going to be a horrible death. And that's not the way many people want to go. They want to have something that will just ease them out. It has become a law in 4 states now that a doctor will not be prosecuted and put in jail and lose his license if he goes along with this, if he is compassionate enough to help his patient who requests this. They have to go through interviews, and like I said, they have to have a 6-month or less prognosis. They have to be adults. They have to be mentally stable, not suicidal or anything like that. The law was first passed in Oregon, and it was passed in 94. It was enacted in 97. It was challenged a couple times, but the Supreme Court upheld it. So Oregon was the first state where people who live in Oregon. You can't come from another state. You have to be a resident here.
Right.
But if their doctor goes along with this, that they can request aid in dying. In fact, I knew a person right here, one of my friends, and I have her last email to all of her friends. I have that in the book too. She requested that. She sent an email out to everyone thanking them for everything and saying, I will be leaving my body on whatever, Sunday between 1 and 3, something like that. Anyway, it was a beautiful way for her to leave the planet. It was also passed in Washington State more recently, enacted in 2009. It just recently, I think it was last May, that Vermont passed it. They passed it through legislation. Oregon and Washington passed it as an initiative, a ballot measure. People voted on it. And then the fourth state that allows it now is Montana, and that came about by an actual case, Baxter versus Montana. So there are different ways that it can be made a law in a state that it's okay, that it's legal. And Compassion and Choices will work with groups in the various states. There's many different states that are in process right now. It just hasn't passed yet in those states, but there's activity going on, and so it will be passed eventually, I feel.
And how do you reconcile that, or how can we talk about spirituality and oneness, and how that death with dignity? Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that a little bit, about oneness and spirituality and death with dignity?
Well, we are all one, and we all have our free choice of how we want to live our individuated portion of that one. Mm-hmm. And I think we have a right to decide. There are some people that believe that there is some benefit to when we suffer, that suffering is something that God wants us to do, and that we are somehow sainted for going through that. That's not my personal belief. But if people feel that way and feel that they are okay with suffering at the end of their life, we don't want to take that away from them. That certainly is their right as well. But we can't force our beliefs on other people. Yes, we are all one, but we have free will to decide about our own life and our own death. And some people have equated it with suicide, and it's really not the same as suicide. Suicide is an act of desperation. And we need to have compassion and not judgment for people who commit suicide, because the problems that they have that would even lead them to that will probably go with them. That's my belief anyway. But when one chooses death with dignity, they're actually creating their after-death experience, and they want to go in peace, and they have a right to do that. It is not that they are trying to leave this planet. They know they're leaving anyway. They just want to have a choice about how they leave. People who commit suicide, they have every possibility of continuing to live, but they choose not to. Whereas people who choose death with dignity, or aid in dying as we call it, they don't have that choice. They know they're dying. They just have a choice as to how they die. And so I don't see it as something that takes away from one's spirituality, because if we truly believe that we are spiritual beings and that sometimes we are in the physical body and sometimes we're in the spiritual realms, then there's really no difference. I love Neil's analogy in his book, Home with God and a Life That Never Ends. He uses like the infinity sign, like a figure 8, and he says that we come into the physical realm, and then we cross over into the spiritual realm, and then cross back into the physical realm. I'm using my hands here. I guess you can't see that.
I could see it, actually.
In your mind, I'm sure.
Yeah, I could.
Yeah, and you remember his description of that probably. And to me, it's like life goes on forever and ever. We just go back and forth between the two realms, and it's not like we are ending life, because life cannot be ended. It can just change form.
Well, and it's interesting you brought up Neil's book, because that happens to be my favorite book of his, The Home with God. But I have a question about your book, because there's two sections. There's the beginning. There's the first part, and then there's the second part. I know that you and I have discussed this a little bit, but I'm curious to know why you did include the second part of your book in your book.
Right. Well, the first part, of course, is the story of Andreas and his whole traumatic ending of his life. I didn't want to leave people there. How bad would that be? The whole point of my book is, as the subtitle suggests, ending the greatest fear of all. The point of the book is to help people die without fear. It's to help us to start a dialogue about death and dying, so that we can talk about it, so that we can get over our fears about it, and move into an understanding that death is a natural part of the life cycle. So the second part of my book, I include a lot of shorter stories about people I've known that were able to cross over, make their transition in a peaceful way, because they knew that they were going to die. Some of the stories I have include actual visions. My grandmother and my cousin have both had visions, literal, a person appearing in front of them. And since they had a Christian background, they identified that person as Jesus. I'm sure another person, if they were Muslim, they would identify that as Muhammad, or, different people would have a different take on it. But it's that, we don't have to go to our death fearing and be dragged out of here kicking and screaming. We can actually have a very nice closure with our family and loved ones, and very peacefully close our eyes and leave the planet. And I think that, in my opinion, how we die probably affects our very first experience on the other side. I don't know that for sure. I haven't been there that I have, but I don't remember. But I really think if we die in a real traumatic way, that it might not be quite as pleasant on the other side in the very initial moments of it, until we acclimate and get help over there. So, the second part of my book was really to help people to see there's another way. There's a more peaceful way.
Well, I certainly appreciate it, and I hope everybody listening does go out and pick up the book, and because it's very moving, and you do such a beautiful job of not leaving people there in that very sad moment, and raising the questions that you do, and I think it's very beneficial. Our time is almost up, but I want to ask you one more question, and then I'm going to let you give your website out again so people can go purchase the book. So in your heart, do you really believe people can get over the fear of death?
I think that as human beings, we will probably always have, in those end moments, we will have this clinging to life. I think it's built into the human beingness, that we cherish life. But yes, I do believe that when we really, as we are approaching our end times, that we can come to a peaceful closure with it. I have to believe that, because I've known people who have. And it's important to have people around us, like I mentioned an Anam Kara, which is like a spiritual midwife, to have someone with you as you're getting close to your last hours or days, to have a person with you that will support you in that. I know when Gordy used to lead Andreas on a guided visualization where Andreas would be riding on the back of Pegasus the horse, and he'd be flying through the air, and he would be visiting the light beings on the other side, because they knew that's where he would be going soon. Having something like that, a visualization to hold in your mind at the end, and that can ease you right across that thin veil that separates us from the other side. In my opinion, it can. So it's good to have support from someone that can help you to do that.
And I really believe that your book is very powerful in kind of getting that message out there that, it is possible to get over this fear of death. And again, I love the book and recommend it very highly. Why don't you give your website out again?
I will. And also let me say, I also would like to encourage people to have their books, ask their local bookstores to carry it, because we need to get it out there more than just Amazon or my website or anything like that. So that's another way to go. But if people purchase it through my website, which is donnacorso.com, if they purchase it during the month of August, there are lots of free gifts that they will get. They can just see on there where to click to purchase it, and then they enter their code from Amazon or Barnes & Noble into the correct space, and that'll get them into the gift page. And some of the gifts are actually a free workshop with Neil Donald Walsh for the first certain number of people who sign up. There's also Barbara Marks Hubbard. There's a part one of an exclusive interview of her life that they would have access to as a download. That would have downloads from Lynn Andrews, M. Claire, the poet, who is Neil's wife, several other people, also a 1-month free subscription to ShirleyMacLaine.com. And my CD, Forever with God, you can also download that free on there, and that's where I read excerpts from Neil's book, Home with God and a Life That Never Ends, with beautiful music by Stephen Pike, my favorite musician on the planet. So all those things and more people can get for free if they purchase it only during the month of August. DonnaCorso.com.
Perfect. Well, perfect. It was a pleasure talking to you, Donna. I always enjoy talking to you. And
Thank you.
I think we're very blessed to have somebody who heard the story and said it needs to be told.
Well, thank you. Well, somebody made me do that. Maybe it was Andreas.
Maybe. Thank you again, and thank you, everybody, for listening. And we will talk with you again next month. Thank you again, Donna.
Thank you, Nanette. It was good to be here.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye.